Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cloud Wars Live, where we explore today's digital revolution by speaking with business executives and thought leaders changing how the world lives, works, plays, learns, and dreams. Our guest today is Sean Ammirati, venture capitalist, professor at Carnegie Mellon University's Business School, entrepreneur, and an observer of what's going on in the digital world today, always with some interesting ideas. Sean, welcome. We're delighted to have you back.
Thanks, Bob. It's great to be here.
Sean is part of our Digital All-Star series and is with us every month under the theme of Ammirati on Innovation. So, Sean, there's some interesting things going on today. And as you look at the worlds of not only startups, but also how big companies are trying to remake themselves, recast themselves into the digital business world, there's a couple things come top to mind for you today. What are you thinking about these days?
Yeah, so I mean, it's been an interesting month for sure, I think. One of the questions that we had talked about last time a little bit, and I think after that recording came out, there were a couple of good stories that even further illustrated this point, is that innovation is not relegated simply to 20-something small brand new companies, but that large companies are able to leverage their assets and their unfair competitive advantages to play in this. And between when we recorded that episode and today, Disney had their investor day and actually announced the Disney Plus streaming offering that they were coming out with, which has been framed by a lot of people as the kind of quote unquote Netflix killer, right? And to me, the interesting thing about what's happened there is the reaction from Wall Street, tech journalists, all these different groups has been incredibly positive. And I think it's because all of a sudden people are realizing like, hey, Disney is going to take the advantages that they have. They have content that nobody else does. They have sort of some moats that give them actual real leverage in these negotiations. And then they're going to actually take a playbook out of these more digitally native companies, right? And so they're going to actually build direct relationships with their end customers. They're going to switch their business model from transactional to more of a subscription model, right? These are things that you and I have been talking about for years with lots of legacy companies under the category of this handle kind of quote unquote digital transformation. But it's hard every time someone steps up and tries to do that. You've got to re-educate Wall Street on how to think about your financial metrics, because it turns out GAAP accounting is not that similar to subscription accounting, right? And so you've got to, and I think to be fair, that's an easier challenge than it was a few years ago. I remember years ago when Adobe made that pivot, what a struggle that was to say, like, we're going to make less money next quarter and you should be excited about that, right? And I mean, their stock went through kind of a full J curve there as they walked people through it. I think what was encouraging is, Investor Day, I think was Thursday evening. Friday morning, there was just a massive jump in the Disney stock as all of a sudden these pieces that you'd watched leadership put together for a while kind of came into sort of a full mosaic picture. And not only did Disney stock shoot up, but this arch competitor Netflix, like although they've come back a little bit with decent earnings, they took a hit right away. And I think it's just, I'm hoping that other CEOs in other boardrooms are taking note of this and asking themselves the same questions. How do we create products and services that transform our relationships with our customers to allow us to have that same type of growth mindset?
Sean, but as you said, the quote unquote Netflix killer, the Disney's unleashed here. But I thought that, over the last 2 or 3 years, I thought Netflix was going to kill Disney. So,
right.
Who's the Vic and who's the perp here,
It was, so I think that's the interesting thing here, right? Is that we've gotten to a point where we assume, hey, if you're a company that was born in the digital age, if you're, and you've gone through the full capital formation prospect and gotten out and gotten public, you must have certain things in your DNA that make you the only organization who can win a market, right? I mean, we were talking just offline a week or so ago about the grocery industry, right? And people say, well, Amazon's coming into grocery, so I'm sure Amazon's going to be the winner in that business. Maybe, but then you see the largest grocery chain in the United States partnering with Microsoft to actually instead of be reactive, be proactive into that, right? There, companies can actually play in this business that weren't born, in the last 30 years. And so I think Disney is a great illustration of that. Now, Disney needs to continue to execute. They're going to need to actually finish the vision that they cast. They've got to launch these. They got to make it work. They've got to pick the right partners. I would love to have been. I don't actually know the answer to this. You may have given some of your connections. My intuition is that they're probably not using Amazon for the streaming. I bet they're not using AWS and EC2. That would be my intuition on it. There's a little bit of you don't want your enemy to also be your friend on that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So they have to pick the right partners. But I mean, I really think this, in a couple years, will be a case study lots of executives point to and say, man, we can do it, in the same way that the Adobe thing has been for the how to be a CFO in this subscription economy world we live in.
Sean, all those points you raise are perfectly online. And as you've said, you want it to be in some ways inspiring, or a case study, or just another boost of confidence to CEOs saying, we can do this. We've got assets that these newer companies can only dream about. But think about, right, the business model. Everybody looks at Netflix as if they were, born as this, incredibly successful creative company. Their original business model, right, was we'll use FedEx to send you overnight as many DVDs as you want. They started off as what would that be, like a bulk wholesaler in some ways.
That's right. But so I think, to be fair, the interesting thing, right, is that there are certain things I believe that Netflix to their core understands that these large companies need to get. So this is not an exhaustive list, but as I was thinking through it, I think that they understand the value of an actual relationship with an end customer. This will start to give Disney that same type of data. They're fine thinking about niches. Even the fact that Disney Plus is not one bundled offering, but it's a number of offerings. So, to me, that's really encouraging. They're okay with disintermediating their revenue, and they think about M&A strategically, right? So to me, is that you think about this stuff, like they've done that well, and then they've also taken this business model evolution and done that really well. I think what's interesting for other executives, if they're thinking about this, is like, okay, how do we do that if I'm sitting in a large grocery chain, or I'm sitting in a large aluminum manufacturer, or I'm sitting in a large automotive company, right? What's my version of Disney Plus, right? And certainly that's things that we've been looking at for a long time at the Corporate Startup Lab over the last couple of years, and we have tools and thoughts around that. But another part of it that's really important is you need to think about how you manage your technology relationships as well, right? And so we were also talking about SAP. They just had their earnings announcement early this morning, right? And I think they've done a good job not only doing the same things themselves that Disney's doing, where they're sort of reinventing themselves as a next generation software company instead of a legacy enterprise software company. Their story as well as I do. But so I think they're doing it themselves. But with this Qualtrics acquisition now, right? They now have actual tools that they can hand to their customers and say, you want to get closer to your customers? Here's a hammer that you can use to build that house. And I think I think the value of that transaction, buying Qualtrics, is not yet appreciated.
Sean, I think that's right on the mark, right? Because I always think it's so interesting, of all the big software companies or big tech companies that would have had the vision, and I think in some ways the guts to pay $8 billion for Qualtrics. What's so interesting is that of all of them, it was SAP, right? The prototypical company, if you think about where they came from, of, order, precision, internally oriented, the software runs everything, right? And so they not only brought a new capability into the company, they're changing the culture of their company, they're changing the vision, they're changing the market's perception of who they are. But what I think is fascinating, in some ways, I don't know that this has been articulated specifically too much, but part of the vision or the aspiration of the enterprise software business for a long time was to take all these different point solutions and combine them into a 360 thing. If SAP pulls this off right, they've done that. They have connected supply chain and demand chain in ways nobody else has ever touched.
That's exactly right. I think that gives them an amazing runway, right? I mean, that's a platform that's legacy defining for the executive suite there. To your point, if they pull it off, and you know, M&A is hard. So and this was a big one, and the larger they are, the harder it is to. So I'm not trying to be Pollyannish here. Like it's going to be there. I am sure there are days ahead that are going to be a lot of work for that C-suite. But if they could pull that off, that gets really exciting. I think the other part of it though, man, if I was them, the thing I'd start thinking about next is how do I also start giving my clients the frameworks, given all these tools, to do what Disney's doing. If like when you think if you think about this sort of moonshot digital transformation, and an enterprise software company is part of the stack of what comes up in that, that's sort of the equivalent of like the software with the line through it. As an outsider look at the pieces, like, man, they've got a path to doing that. I would love to see them flesh that out, because that could be, first of all, I think the world needs it. Like we talked about this last time, the world needs these legacy companies to continue to innovate. We can't relegate innovation to a subset of the economy and a subset of society. Like that is incredibly, incredibly dangerous along lots of levels. So independent of what's good for SAP stock and all that stuff, which obviously they're good German executives, I'm sure they're very concerned about that, as they should be. Independent of all of that though, as a professor sitting in wearing my professor hat, not my venture capital hat for a moment, just for society, somebody needs to do that. It feels like they're putting the pieces together. And if they position it the right way, that could be magical. Absolutely magical.
Yeah, Sean, I couldn't agree with you more on that. I think that innovation needs to be everywhere. It needs to be something that no company leader feels like, well, that's beyond what I can do. And here's a couple examples. I think I saw Goodyear Tire and Rubber, invented 1898, and they've been working with Microsoft on some new things. Hearing their CIO talk about it, she talks a lot about, yes, the word tire is in our name, and it's certainly been a part of who we've been and who we are. But she said, we're also imagining a world beyond tires, when the connection to the world is not our tires connecting cars to the road, but all those things that go around it. And one of the other points that she made that I thought was very powerful is she said, it's easy to say, for a company to say, we have to put the customer at the center of everything we do. I think that's an incredibly important thing to say, and she clearly does too. But then how then do you do that? And so she said, we have to give not just salespeople or marketing or customer service, we have to give every single person in the company the ability for them to see and position and enhance that customer experience, putting them at the center of it. And that's, I think, one of the key things that these executives you talk about in big companies, mid-sized companies, have to be able to grasp.
That's right. And language matters, right? So even her acknowledging and then attacking that, hey, tires in our name matters. A group that I do a lot of work with here, Bosch, they renamed their automotive division, which is their largest division, their mobility division, right? And on some level, that's just like, you can argue that's just semantics and whatever, but I think there's a lot of implications around the handles that you're giving your employees to work with here, because these are large organizations, which is a huge asset if you can do it the right way. It's sort of like the M&A point earlier, like if you take advantage of them, it becomes a huge asset. If you don't, it slows you down, it becomes a burden, all of that kind of thing. So I think that's interesting. I also think the fact that you said it's not the Goodyear's trying to do this by themselves, but the Goodyear's partnering is meaningful here. When I talk to executives a lot about this, I say, look, I think that the right approach is some blend of doing some stuff internal, figuring out the right strategic partnerships, and then doing a little bit of strategic M&A, right? And so sort of do, partner, buy. And as you sort of, if you can figure, and it's not that there's not a formula that's the one size fits all there, but if you can do a little bit of each of those and do it well, you're really positioning yourself to do this well. And I think, you know, the tech companies are great partners. I think universities are great partners. There's a bunch of entities that become really helpful thought partners in that middle of those three categories.
Yeah, Sean, along those lines, the partnering thing, I wanted to mention one idea to you, and then I want to be sure to also include a Larry Ellison quote about Disney. And the partnership thing, again, I think one of the reasons I've been so impressed about Microsoft and what it's doing these days and why it's been #1 on the Cloud Wars top 10 for more than a year, their technology advancement has been, you know, very, very impressive. But equally impressive, I think, is their go-to-market business.
Yeah.
So Microsoft has developed some pretty interesting programs where they tell their customers, you create a piece of technology around Azure, and if you want, you know, of course, use it internally. If you want, our salespeople will help you plan out how you can sell it to other people.
Right.
So when you mentioned Kroger's a couple minutes ago about in the grocery chain business, Kroger, of course, sells groceries. Kroger also now sells software to other retailers.
Right.
Now, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, if you went in and proposed that to somebody, you either would have been laughed out or something. So there's a huge shift in now what these partners represent. One Microsoft executive said, it's so funny, for 40 years, we made this stuff and our partners sold it. Said now our partners are starting to make stuff and we, Microsoft, sell it. So it's a whole new world, right?
That's right. No, I mean, so first of all, just on the Microsoft thing for a minute, like, is anybody a better candidate for CEO of the decade? I mean, like the transformation there has been it's kind of mind-boggling. I mean, think about what he took over versus where Microsoft sits today. And I don't mean I'm not trying to take any shots at it, but I mean, that was awesome. I mean, that's fantastic. Right. But I think he's done, my sense is, and again, you spend more time with these tech execs than I do, but from the outside looking in, it feels like he's changed the culture internally. He's changed their approach to how they think about partnering. And then, I mean, the LinkedIn acquisition was brilliant. I mean, just absolutely brilliant. And because LinkedIn is LinkedIn, it's the most public disclosure I've ever seen on exactly how brilliant it really was. I mean, anybody with a little bit of IQ can go back and read the disclosure from LinkedIn and actually figure out not just what Microsoft is in that, but you can see other ones who you know, oh, well, that's what Salesforce was doing. And I mean, it was a great move by those guys, right? And I've got to imagine when you fast forward, right, the combination of having the built-in professional network that they do, plus this partner first mentality, I think they are going to flip a lot of these businesses on their head to go ahead and actually come in and say, like, let's help you with this transformation.
I would heartily endorse that, your notion about Satya Nadella and the job he's done. But if you think about it too, right, but to say, oh, well, you know, what he did was obvious. No, it wasn't, because I think if you looked at Microsoft before him, they would have fallen into exactly the type of category of some of these big troubled, you know, legacy companies from other industries. They were struggling, sort of swarming, you know, where do I go? How do I go? Trying to do the same things they used to do a little bit better, a little bit cheaper, instead of reorienting themselves and repackaging this. And I guess in some ways what I find so exciting and interesting about your point with Disney and how they took all of those extraordinary assets they had was the Larry Ellison quote I wanted to mention to you. So in you know, one of the books about him, there's an anecdote in there that a fairly high-level executive at Oracle had left and gone to work at Yahoo, and he ran into Larry somewhere, and he said, So this guy's at Yahoo, 10 years ago and 12 years ago. And he says, oh, hey, Larry, I'd love to get your advice. Disney called us up and said they want to talk to us at Yahoo about doing something together. What do you think? And Larry says, what do I think? Let's see. Disney's one of the best known brands in the world. Their theme parks are incredible. Their movies are great. They got this and this, the biggest content library in the world, blah, 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 blah. That's what Disney has. Yahoo has free email. So, said, has the world gone crazy? So, part of his notion was that these big companies, because they're not always the shiny new object, we tend to think of like, they're done, they're over the hill, they're this or that. And I think very much the case at Microsoft was Nadella came in and said, we've got a lot of fantastic raw material here. We just haven't put it together in the right ways. And then aspirationally, maybe we've lost a little bit of our nerve. We got to get out and not just talk about being lead, we've got to lead.
Yeah. I remember this was probably 10 years ago. You were at Information Week at the time, who helped put on the Web 2.0 summit every year. And I remember being at the bar at the W after like the first night of the Web 2.0 summit. And I ended up sitting down and hanging out with 4 Microsoft executives who were all like super, you could tell, like really smart, really talented people. But like by the second drink in, I just said to them, hey guys, and I meant this, like one of 3 of them, I think took it well, one took it a little insulting, but we were having a good time in my mind. I was like, I got to ask you, like, why do you work at Microsoft? You seem really smart, really talented. Like there's a lot of interesting companies out there. Like what keeps you at a place like Microsoft? And it was interesting, as smart as these guys were, like they really, really struggled to articulate a reason that they were excited to go to work every day for Microsoft, right? I was recently at a different sort of tech gathering, and I was with a couple of Microsoft guys, and I was thinking about that thing. These guys were like buzzing about how exciting it, like you didn't need to prompt them. Like they couldn't wait to tell you about how Microsoft was taking this technology and applying it to the enterprise and taking that technology. The culture shift there is just noticeable from the outside looking in. And I think it's contagious. And I think that contagiousness is actually how you see them walk into a place like Kroger and help those entities bring the same kind of reinvention to themselves, if you will, which I think it's going to be a fun couple of years to watch these things ripple out now. So it's awesome.
Sean, if I could maybe close with a thought here, exactly along those lines. Bill and I did an interview a few weeks ago with an executive from Guardian Life Insurance Company, founded in 1860. It's executive VP, chief of operations, and CIO. And he described how he's tried to create a culture of innovation within the company. So they do these things that involve Shark Tanks and other stuff. But he said a recent one focused, broadly on how can we make the customer experience better. He said the company has 9,500 employees, more than 5,000 participated in this sort of innovation jam coming forward like that. And ultimately, he said, a lot of people think that buying and selling life insurance has to be painful, or it has to be boring, it has to be drudgery. He said, I don't think it does. He said, I think we can make this delightful and pleasurable.
Yep.
When you got executives at companies that are, were founded before the Civil War, who are willing to think that way, and he talked about the type of talent they're able to bring in now that their mindset has shifted.
Yep.
It's not about what we've done in the past, it's about where the customers are going in the future. All things are possible.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of wrap on that with you for a moment as we sort of wrap this up. The thing I think that's powerful about what you just said is, look, because of what I do at CMU, I do quite a bit of like the rubber chicken circuit. Like, hey, we want to, please come talk to our team about being more innovative. And I've seen lots of different approaches to these general initiatives, right? For what it's worth, I'm personally very skeptical of the Shark Tank like things, and maybe it worked well for them, but in general, I feel like that's dangerously copying the wrong things from startups. The question you have to ask yourself is this mindset you're trying to infuse. Like, what are the right first principle things to copy in? And I think pitching and getting your employees good at pitching is actually not a muscle that if I were choosing which muscles to build in my culture, that would not be high on my list for what it's worth. On the other hand, being customer centric, like you're talking about, is the first muscle that I would build in these organizations. And I think what's great is when execs have the fortitude to experiment with a lot of these different things and actually see what works in their culture and actually copy the right things, like being customer centric, that kind of stuff. Like the easy ones to pick on are like when they go, tour Silicon Valley for a week and like come back and they're like, hey, we'll put a ping pong table in the corner over there. And then we'll be just like Google, that's the extreme example of copying the wrong thing. I think the Shark Tank style pitches aren't great, but man, if you can change and make your organization customer centric like that, you really do open up some opportunities for real transformation there, which is super exciting. It's cool to see a company like a life insurance company actually fleshing that out.
So Sean, the final thought, tying SAP back into this, I believe that one of the other things that will come out of the Qualtrics acquisition as they connect that supply chain and demand chain, as Bill McDermott says, the X's and O's, I think it's going to finally obliterate what I think is one of the biggest obstacles to this type of transformation that you are encouraging companies to, and that is these notions of front office and back office.
Yes.
I think that is killer, deadly, devastatingly bad language.
That's right. I couldn't agree more. I think that's right. I mean, you're better with words than me, but it feels like that's right. But SAP is still figuring out the right narrative to articulate that. Like, not that they don't know the strategy, but the narrative around that strategy, right? But man, like as people grasp that and run with that, it's going to be really exciting to see how that transforms these industries, which is awesome.
Well, Sean, thank you. This is great as always. Your perspectives are fresh. They're optimistic and they're enthusiastic about what has to happen. But I think also, the other side of it is talk goes only so far. At some point, people have to crank that into action. They got to have the courage and the will and the fortitude to get out and get after this. So thanks so much. This is terrific.
Thank you, Bob. This is great.
And thanks all of you folks for tuning in. Sean will be back with us next month for another episode of Ammirati on Innovation. Thanks for joining us here on Cloud Wars Live. We'll look forward to seeing you next time.